In many levels then, you've got local conflicts within countries, and then between countries, and then between continents. I mean, one particular aspect of the Darfur conflict that is very overlooked in the international media is the fact that there are huge pressures, huge competition for depleted natural resources between the many different tribes of Darfur, which, as many people say, is largely the cause of the current conflict going on between the pastoralists and the nomads and so on.
And I want to add to this, just this point that I think all of us are saying, and just to sharpen it a bit, is the issue of water in this, because it is really, water is becoming more and more a scarce resource. And it's the water stress, and it's also the fights over water which are growing. I mean, I know in my own country, it's also growing not just between rural and rural people, but really between rural and urban.
You live in Delhi. Look at the Yamuna River.
It's not a river.
It's not a river anymore.
It's a drain.
But that's because of local abuse, isn't it? People washing in it, all the sewage that's thrown into it.
It's because
it's bad water management by the Indians themselves.
No, it's senseless water and excreta management. Please understand, it's not just about water. It's the mindset that we have adopted, and we have to start looking at this to understand that these technologies that were invented perhaps in parts of the world which had money and a lot of resources are completely inappropriate for us.
I wanted to come back to the issue of Darfur, because it is probably one of the worst crises the world is witnessing at the moment. People say that this conflict, it is an ethnic conflict, and people are fighting each other, the Janjaweed and so forth. True, but the bottom line is that people are fighting for access to natural resources. And as long as these issues are not factored in, whatever peacekeeping forces we can send there, the long-term solutions will have to deal with land use management and land degradation. We have to take these into consideration. There will be no solution, long-term solution, if we are not finding appropriate solutions to access to natural resources in these countries.
And this problem is manufactured or replicated, rather, in so many different ways. I mean, Rosamund McDougall, I want to put this question to you then. If you all accept that desertification and drought is a major reason behind why people migrate from one country to another, do you think that Europe should welcome these economic refugees, these environmental refugees, and say, fine, these are reasons why you can come and settle in Europe?
Well, first of all, of course, most of the displacement is within Africa at the moment. From Sudan, it's into Chad, I believe, which has its own internal conflict.
But we know about those sub-Saharan African dwellers who are washed up on the shores of Europe, southern Europe.
Yes, we do. And the problem is that the speed of ecological degradation now is so fast that Europe has discovered it's got its own problems. And quite apart from all the political background, Europe simply cannot absorb 1 million to 50 million refugees every year because of environmental stress. So it seems to me that a much better solution, which everyone can take, is to concentrate on reducing their fertility as well as their impact on the environment, so that every country in the world can reduce its impact on two fronts.
So you're saying quite clearly that Europe has to close its doors and say, we'll accept those refugees who are fleeing political persecution, but those who are fleeing environmental degradation
I'm not saying that.
Well, what do you say to that?
What I think is happening, and what will have to happen, is certainly Europe won't close its doors, but I think what will happen, because its own population is stabilising, and it has its own energy resource and other problems and needs its own land, is that it'll come up with a policy that eventually probably balances emigration with immigration. How they choose or who is let in, I don't know, but I think that's probably what will happen.
And that's what we're going to be discussing in the final part of our discussion, because we've told you about the impact on both humans and the environment of desertification and drought. Let's just get an idea of how we can tackle the problems.
We should be inspired by those who have lived here for centuries, even thousands of years. We should follow their example and respect the desert.
C'est un bonheur de partager ce mode de vie. We know that the government has started a project trying to help farmers grow other crops that are less dependent on water, but still it's a challenge. Like this year, it's a dry year, there's very little rainfall water.
It all comes down to making the poor real stakeholders. That's what's always been missing here. But people now own their own lands. And unless they get behind biogas, tree planting and all the other measures, the desert will win.
We were told to dig the land in relation to the water flow. The earth pile in the hole diverts the water into the pit. As soon as the millet grows, it develops well and quickly. We have little weeding to do, so it's less tiring.
My question to you is, how can we together mobilize more interest, more political will, more resources to these issues that are at the core of the livelihoods of so many hundreds of millions of people?
Rosamund McDougall, you seem to have hinted or said quite explicitly that the problem is too many people.
Yes, I think
that's the fundamental problem.
It's becoming absolutely clear now that that is one of the problems, so it must be tackled, and it's a very uncomfortable thing to have to do. And it can be tackled, but it has to be done by developed countries as well as developing countries. This isn't just the problem of some countries.
How do you account for this, for instance? The Sudan is the biggest country in Africa.
Yes.
It has a population only of about 28 million, yet it's a country that's the size of Western Europe. By no stretch of the imagination is that a country which is overpopulated. Well, so how do you account for that, then?
I would define overpopulation as overpopulation in relation to the resources, natural resources, which could support a country.
But the resources are there. If you look at it as a member of the Arab world, it has 40% of the Arab world's arable land.
I can't answer that question,
but
I can make if I could make the point, for example,
sure.
about because I come from the UK, which is very, very overpopulated. We, in fact, in England, have a population density which is the 4th highest in the world, if you exclude.
But nobody's starving.
No, nobody's starving. We are suffering land pressures. We're suffering water shortages already, and we have to tackle those problems by reducing our consumptions. But I think the other uncomfortable side of the coin is that countries with high fertility rates can help to reduce them, and some countries have actually done it. Iran, for example, despite being an Islamic republic, has actually brought its fertility rate down from 7 children per mother in 1980 to just above replacement rate, alongside giving women's rights.
Ibrahim Thiaw, how convincing are Rosamund McDougall's argument?
Well, I think she's right that the population growth is an issue. But I don't agree that arid lands are generally overpopulated. Generally, they are underpopulated. The issue is the carrying capacity, whether the ecosystem can manage to have more and more people using the lands, because land degradation. Now, your question about the comparison that you are having now between Sudan and the UK is different. Because Sudan is a developing country whose population are totally dependent or partially dependent on natural resources. People from the UK depend less on nature for their survival. They have other commodities, and the country has enough financial capacities to develop industries and to have people working in other sectors than the primary sector. That is the issue.
Let's look at answers. Is the answer to population control forcible sterilization and distribution of condoms, or is the answer to population control or population growth, a decline, really about, literacy of women and, most importantly, economic security of these lands and people? And if that is the case, let's start seriously talking about what do we do about economic security, because if that will happen, you will also get ecological security. I think population is really missing the point.